Welcome to Online Lecture 1A here in your Biology 140 semester. It's so good to have you all. I want to welcome everybody. I'm Mike Spath, your instructor for this semester, and I just want y'all to know that everything in this course is going to be covered in these online lectures. So if you need any explanation, if you need any actual teaching from your instructor, this is the place to go. These online lectures are designed to allow you to continue to receive instruction. Despite this class being online, you will have an instructor helping you through the material. This isn't just me assigning some reading and then you to go home and work on all of it by yourself. I want you to feel very supported this semester, and I want you to know that you actually have a teacher right here. Every time you can have some opportunity to record these lectures, or I should say to play them, then it's as if you're in class. And great thing about these though is you can turn me off, you can press pause, you can rewind if you need to hear something again. There's some real advantages to having online lectures. And as I'm doing these online lectures, you're going to actually see the screen that I'm looking at, so you're going to get to see the PowerPoint slides. This is a cover of your textbook, the 14th edition of Environmental Science by Cunningham and Marianne and William, a couple. And they, as a team, as a husband and wife team, they've done an excellent job creating a textbook that's very relevant and something that I think you'll learn from and actually be able to read very well. It's not hard reading. It's not challenging. It's written in a very I think in a general audience sort of fashion. It's designed for everyone to be able to understand quite well. So anyway, guys, what we'll do with these online lectures is I'm going to, of course, go through PowerPoint presentations, but I also want you to be aware that I'm also going to be helping you prepare for the quiz. So this is the Quiz 1 review sheet, and you can see these are all questions that you should take the time to answer and study, because your online quizzes are timed, and there's just not enough time to try to look up the answers. So you really need to do these review sheets. They're not required, but you should do them. Write out the answers to these and then study them so that you can take the quiz online in a timely fashion. You'll have about 20 questions, or let's see, 15 to 20 questions, somewhere in that range, and you have about 20 minutes. So you typically have a little bit more than 1 minute per question on these online quizzes. The review sheets are very specific. They really tell you what you need to know for the quiz. So for quiz 1, this review sheet, we're going to be addressing in this particular lecture numbers 1 through 8. So I'm going to basically provide the explanation and the answers to the first 8 questions of your quiz 1 review sheet. So we're going to answer the question, what does the word environment mean? What may be included in a person's or organism's environment? So we're going to explain what that is, then we'll get into the 4 periods of conservation history. We are going to go through all of these in today's online lecture 1A. And then in 1B, I'm going to take you through questions 9 through 16, the second half of chapter 1. Okay? So just want to point that out. I won't always point this out every time, but I want y'all to just be aware of that. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Let's start getting into the material. I think you guys are going to like this course. Why? Because this course is relevant. When you watch the news every night, you're going to actually see issues that environmental biology and environmental science addresses. So you're going to really find a lot of connections with the real world. And these are things that are very politically charged, socially charged. We have very strong viewpoints on the Republican side, very strong viewpoints on the Democratic side, and on the independent side as well. And a lot of these issues come up in this course. It's still a science course, so we are going to be learning a lot about science, but we're going to learn about a lot of other factors just besides science. So the first real slide to look at is this slide. And I don't know how y'all feel when you look at this, but you can clearly see that this is a very poor area. This is an area outside of Nairobi, Kenya. Nairobi, Kenya, it's the capital of Kenya. It's a very fast-growing city. It's got several million people in the city, and the area of the city that we're looking at is an area called Kibera. So this is Kibera, a section of Nairobi. And Nairobi has approximately, along with the other slums around Nairobi, about 60% of the city's population. So obviously you can see from the picture there's not very good sanitation. You can see you've got kind of a trough, almost like a ditch going down through the middle of the street. And you can see there's trash, polluted water. You can see there's a duck in the background, people walking around. It just looks very dirty. And there's a child here eating on the steps of this city. So this is a complicated situation. Obviously, it's not a good environment, right, guys? You can tell from the picture. This is not a good place to live for your health for several reasons. But it's a necessary place because Nairobi is growing so quickly that we have people coming in from the outskirts, from the farmlands. They move to the city in hopes to get more money. And then eventually they do get enough money and they can get into middle-class homes in the suburbs, you might call them. They're around Nairobi. So they might only be here in this shanty town-like place only for a few years, these settlements. So they're all kind of moving up, most of them. Some of them are stuck here. They won't ever get out. But it is a way to get a lot of people in a small area. It does provide basic housing, basic shelter needs. But it's far from where we want to be. So this is just one of the many issues we're going to address in Biology 140. How do we deal with a growing population, a rapidly growing population, and as these populations grow, how we deal with the polluted environment that comes along with these growing populations. So many issues we're going to struggle and grapple with. I want you to be thinking about ways we can hopefully relieve these areas from environmental damage, but at the same time provide for the needs of people. There is a lot of progress being made here. A lot of the energy in Africa and other areas is now coming from sustainable technology, so we're coming a long way, but we really have got to do a lot of work at finding ways to create cleaner energy for this growing population that's producing a lot of waste and a lot of pollutants, a lot of health hazards. So, an interesting case study. Let's move on now to our outline. So, we have a little bit of an introduction. We covered kind of that. We're going to go through current conditions in the world. So, I'm going to give you a lot of statistics, a lot of numbers on where we stand in the world. I think you're going to be surprised. Why? What do you think? Well, I think you're going to be surprised in a good way. I think you're going to go, well, gosh, things are bad in many areas, but there's a lot of hope. And in many ways, right now is the best time for humans on this planet compared to the past. Like we have world hunger is at an all-time low. Despite our population being at an all-time high, world hunger is actually at a very much of a low point. So there's some positive things here. It's not all negative. We're going to go through the historical perspectives. So I'm going to take you through the history of environmental science. Then we'll look at what's titled a divided world, the really rich world, the developed world, which includes United States, Europe, Japan, Australia. And then we'll look at the developing world, those countries we used to call third world, a lot of the Latin American countries, a lot of sub-Saharan African countries, Southeast Asia. So we're going to look at some of those parts of the world. And then we'll eventually get to sustainable development at the beginning of online lecture 1B. Okay, so let's now get into the review sheet questions. And the first question was, what is the environment? So we're going to define that. Now, in the environment, we have both the natural environment and the natural world, and we have the social world. So when we define environment, it's important to recognize that it's not just the natural world. Isn't that how most of you would have defined environment? So like on this online quiz, this quiz 1 that you're going to be taking, remember the environment is not just the natural world. It's not just the trees, the rocks, the air around you, the atmosphere. It's actually the circumstances or even the conditions that surround an organism or group of organisms. So it would include not only the natural world, it would also include the social world, the cultural conditions that you're in. Like, for example, if you're in a communist country versus a more democratic society, if you're in a place where there's a lot of poverty versus a place that's wealthier, if you're in a particular part of the world that's very culturally diverse versus a place that's not as culturally diverse. So we're looking at the complex of social and cultural conditions, and all those things affect us and our community. So the environment literally means your surroundings, to encircle or surround, and it's much more holistic than you may have imagined. For example, there's some mysteries as to why we have life expectancy variances or variations among folks in developed countries. Don't you think that most people in developed countries would have similar lifespans, or life expectancies, I should say? Yeah, you expect similar life expectancies in, say, like Russia and, say, even the United States. But actually, Russia has a much lower life expectancy, despite the fact that we're both developed. There's something of the cultural and social and even the way the government is run there that seems to have a negative impact on life expectancy. We'll talk more about that. So it's much more than that. Even religion is part of the environment you live in. Living in the southern United States versus living in the northern United States. Your religion affects your environment. It actually affects your environment. It can affect crime rates. It can affect how you take care of the environment, the natural world, those kinds of things. You'll find relationships between people who have strong faiths and people who have not as much of the faith, maybe more of an agnostic or atheist kind of belief system. And you can see how that affects their views towards nature. So it's a lot more than just the natural world. So make sure you know that when you get to the quiz, all right? So let's move on to the next slide. So now we've defined environment. Now we can define environmental science, which is what this course is basically all about. Environmental biology is just environmental science with an emphasis on the living component of environmental science. We're going to focus more on the living world. That's where the biology part comes in. So environmental science is the systematic. Now, what does that mean? Does anybody know? Systematic, that means orderly. It means there's an orderly process here. We're using the scientific method. We're using actual protocols. We're using standards. We're not just kind of throwing this thing together. This is something we do very orderly. Systematic study of our environment and our proper place in it. So now we've defined environment, and now we can understand we are trying to study the environment and what is our proper place. And that's very debatable, by the way. What is the proper place for human beings in the environment? What's our role? What's our purpose? Should we consider ourselves as stewards over the natural world, or are we simply a part of the community in the natural world? So we see ourselves as just one of the many species? Should we see ourselves as being dominant over nature? There's a lot of different worldviews that are going to affect how you see our role in the environment. So that's why environmental science draws on a lot of disciplines. It's not just natural. We're going to be talking about things that pertain to psychology, sociology, of course, biology, all kinds of other areas of discipline, even engineering. So we're going to draw on many disciplines, skills, and interests. So at some point in the semester, we're probably going to engage you. You're going to become interested at some point. Even if you were interested in things like sociology, we're going to talk about how views of race can affect how certain groups are exposed to toxins. It just turns out that minority groups are much more likely to have exposure to toxins like incinerators and waste, toxic waste areas are always much closer to minority groups. So we're going to talk about some things like that. There's environmental injustice, a lot of different things we're going to get into. So it's what we call interdisciplinary. That's just a big word meaning we're going to draw on many areas of study. It's interdisciplinary and integrative. So it's combining many areas of discipline. So we'll look at the natural sciences. And does anybody know what that would be? Yeah, the natural sciences would be like biology, chemistry, physics, astronomy, etc. Social sciences, right? Those would be things like history, psychology, sociology. And then the humanities, right? Your arts classes typically, drama, things like that. Philosophy falls under humanities. Ethics follows underneath the humanities. So we're going to be looking at all these different areas. So we're going to focus on understanding and resolving environmental problems humans have created. So if any of y'all like to solve problems, this is a great class for you. I want you to be thinking about how we can solve some of these problems throughout the semester. In fact, some of the ideas that you may come up with may be the ideas that politicians really need and that other people in society need to think of. So you may be thinking of something that we haven't even come up with yet. So this is a nice pie graph. It demonstrates all of the branches of discipline, the different disciplines and subject matter that we might include in environmental science or biology. So political science, what policies lead to sustainable solutions? You know, politics have a whole lot to do with how we wind up impacting the environment. Sociology, how do people adopt new ideas? You know, how we get a whole society of people to buy into the idea that sustainable development and sustainable technologies are a good thing for us. That takes time. Urban planning, what kind of urban designs can reduce energy use? What can we do? Build more solar panels, for example. What are the best ways we can do? How do we get those solar panels into places like large cities? Engineering, how can we design better vehicles? This is a huge area that many different companies are undertaking right now. Economics, we always ask that question. How do certain policies affect economics? You might have asked this question, can we actually have policies that help protect the environment but also help the economy? Doesn't it seem like they're always at odds? It seems like every time we have an idea that's good for the environment, it's not good for economics. You know, for example, in our presidency right now, many would say, you know, Donald Trump is about economics but not about the environment. Seems like he tends that direction. President Obama seemed like he tended more environmentally favorable, but it seems like economics maybe weren't as important to him, maybe. Someone might argue that anyway. So is there a way for both economics to do well while we're being environmentally friendly? Wouldn't that be cool? Kind of combine the strengths of both of those presidents, put them together. Wow, that'd be really cool, maybe. Ecology. How does energy production affect populations? So we want to think about how energy production, you know, how, say, biomass or biofuels, raising algae in the ocean, how might that affect other populations? If we were to use algae for fuel and we're growing the algae in the ocean, that might affect a lot of other organisms. And even things like chemistry. How can we make better batteries which would be used to store the energy from solar and wind power? Because, you know, that's what solar and wind power does, guys. That energy is stored in batteries. So battery inventions, new engineering there could really have a really positive impact. So there's so many possibilities, guys. It's an exciting time. Many opportunities to make a lot of money, too. If we can find some solutions, and we will. We're going to find some solutions, and so many of us are going to look back and go, oh, man, I wish I could have thought of that. So, all right, let's talk about current conditions. So now we've looked at environmental science. We've seen it draws on many disciplines. It's very interdisciplinary. We've seen it's very integrative. And now we're going to look at the current state in our world today. Again, you might be surprised in a good way, but you might also be alarmed. Right now, human population is about 7.5 billion. It goes up by about 80 million a year. Okay? So human population is growing despite the fact that we are having many fewer children than before. The average number of children born per woman back in the 1960s was about 5. So globally, we had an average of about 5 children born per woman back about 50 years ago, 50 plus. And now we are down to about a little over 2. So a little bit over 2, around 2.3 or so is about the typical average number of children born per woman. So it's not just developed countries, like you might think developed countries have small families. Even the developing countries now have many fewer children. So you might be thinking, well, Mr. Spath, well, if we went from 5 to 2.3, why is the human population still growing so much? Well, remember, our human population is so high now. We have 7.5 billion. So even if we only have a little over 2 children per woman, our population can still grow by 80 million a year. 2.1 is the magic number for replacement. So if we go to 2.1 children per woman, then we will have a stable population. Why 0.1? Does anybody know? Why is it a little bit more than 2? Seems like if you had 2 people and they had 2 children, right, that would balance out. Well, it's actually 2.1 because some people can't have children. Some people choose not to have children. Different reasons. So we need to have a little bit more than 2 to sustain our population. Once you get down to the ones, yeah, you actually start seeing the population drop. A lot of countries are there. Places like Germany are around 1.7. Germany is basically dropping in population. If it weren't for immigration, people are immigrating. That's why Germany is growing, but not by births. Climate change. Well, it's a big topic. It's a hot topic. The burning of fossil fuels. We strongly believe and have much support to show that the burning of fossil fuels does in fact cause global climate change. I know there's some skeptics out there. I'm so glad you're listening. I'm so glad you're a part of this class. I'm going to provide evidence throughout the semester. I'm not trying to convince you. I just want you to know the facts. And I'm going to show you why we believe fossil fuels cause global climate change. I'm going to show you the scientific basis for that, and I'm going to give you some data to help you see that does affect our climate. We definitely are coming out of an ice age. We know that. We've been warming up. The Earth has been warming for at least 10,000 years. So we know we're naturally warming anyway. But we also believe that human beings have caused increased warming rates. And we're seeing sea level rise, we're seeing ice caps melting, we're seeing many different impacts, we're seeing more severity of storms. There's lots of different things that are happening that show this is in fact happening, and it's also because of the burning of fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide levels have really grown, and we'll talk about some of those numbers. Hunger. All right, so food, you probably knew this, is inequitably distributed across the globe. So there are places where we have plenty of food. There's places where we don't have enough. That's still a problem, but we've come a long way, guys. We see more equitability of food than we've ever had before, but it's still not even, and that's a concern. One of the biggest concerns is 2/3 of agricultural land shows signs of degradation. So when you go to all the prime agricultural lands, like those areas where you see the cornfield every year or the soybean fields around where you live, those areas, about 67% of them show signs of degradation. So we need to start farming the ocean perhaps, and many people are. There's actually a major effort going on to begin farming algae in the oceans. And that algae is delicious when it's prepared right, and you can also just take the sugars out of it and you won't even know. So that's one of the ways we're thinking about, gosh, the land seems exhausted. The earth is it's covered by much more water than land. So why not farm the ocean more? And that will give the land a break. Clean water. Well, this could be the most critical resource in the 21st century. We think that the amount of clean water available to people is definitely decreasing. This is one of the biggest concerns. We think there could be water wars. It's already happening, but we think that's going to increase even more. So the amount of water, clean water available is a huge concern. Almost 1 billion people, 965 million or so, do not have access to clean water. And we think that the number of people needing clean water is we know for sure the number of people without clean water is going to increase. About 600 million lack safe drinking water, but that number is an underestimate, about 9% of us, so it's probably a lot higher than that. But 965 million are chronically undernourished, and that kind of goes along with the water problem too. So we do think that about 40% of the world population will live in countries where water demands now exceed supplies. That's the current estimate. 40% of the world population right now is in a state where water demands exceed supplies. By 2025, we think that 75% of us could live under similar conditions where water demands exceed supplies. So that's an area that we definitely have concern about. That's an area that's going to probably not get any better. Energy, does anybody know what percentage of our energy comes from fossil fuels? It's still 80%. So 80% of our energy still comes from fossil fuels. And of course, these fossil fuels not only cause increases of CO2, which causes global climate change, they also cause all other types of pollution. There is a wonderful shift towards using more renewable sources of energy. So we're getting better and better. There are many promises and pledges, like the European Union wants to have 20% of its energy from renewable sources by 2020. Well, United Kingdom hopes to cut carbon dioxide emissions by 60%. So there's a lot of effort here, and we're going to get better there. Biodiversity loss. Did you know that 800 species went extinct in the last century? 800 species have gone extinct in the last century. 10,000 are now considered endangered. So we're seeing tremendous loss in biodiversity. How high is it? Guys, we're seeing so many species going extinct. It's comparable to the last major extinction event, which happened back in the Cretaceous period. 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs died, that's about what we're looking at. So we're now experiencing one of the major mass extinction events that have occurred in all of history. There have only been about 6 major extinction events, and we're actually in one right now. Except this extinction event is different because you can blame it on one species, and that's human beings. Air pollution, we think about 3 million people die a year from air pollution. The air quality is definitely worsened in so many areas, but it's actually improved in a lot of areas. So in large cities, air pollution is actually better. So the air, say in New York City, for example, is cleaner now than it was 50 years ago. So it's not all bad. We're doing a lot of things to help relieve that. So again, not all bad things here. All right? So signs of hope. Let's talk about the positive. First of all, population and pollution. Many cities are more livable today. They're definitely cleaner, as I said. And that has a lot to do with stabilizing human birth rates. So we've seen human birth rates, again, go from 5 children per woman down to about a little over 2. We're seeing clean technology use. All of these things are making our cities much, much better. We're seeing cities in China where 80% of the energy and 80% of the households now get their energy from solar power. So we're seeing this shift here. So population is stabilizing. We think it's going to peak out between 8 and 11 billion. And most people think that's going to happen close to 2050. So the Earth will peak out in human population and then will actually start to decline. Now we'll see how that plays out. Health. Life-threatening diseases has been reduced in almost every country. So we're seeing much, much better health. We're not seeing life expectancies are much higher than they've ever been before. 50 years ago, life expectancies were, I'd say between 10 and 20 years shorter than they are now. So we're definitely seeing a lot of improvements there. Hunger, for example, we don't see that this horrible famines that used to plague people nearly as much as we did before. We could see that chronic hunger during the 1990s. We had about 1 billion people added to the world through human population growth, but the number facing food insecurity and chronic hunger declined by about 40 million. So despite the human population growing, we saw a lot fewer incidences of hunger across the world. Information and education, better than ever. I was talking to some people who are missionaries, they're friends of mine, and they have internet access. In fact, some of them say that internet access is better in Afghanistan, and others have said that the internet access is better in Romania, parts of Africa, than it is here. So people are getting access to information and education. It's doing much, much better. And the education of young women is particularly important in stabilizing human populations. We'll talk more about that. Sustainable resource use and habitat conservation. You know, the number of reserves, areas that are protected, has gone way up. We've seen increases from about 7 to nearly 12% of the Earth's land surface is now protected. And that happened in only about 20, maybe 30 years. So we went from 7% roughly, somewhere around in that area, to about 11% of the Earth's land surface is now protected. So we're seeing a lot more tropical rainforests. Things have slowed down there. Brazil has slowed things down dramatically, much more habitat protection. So we're seeing a lot of that. And I've heard before that if we could just get 12% of our land areas protected, that will preserve most of the world's biodiversity. And that's about where we're at now. So we're seeing a lot of improvements there. So that's certainly encouraging. Yeah, the exact number is 11.7% of the Earth's land surface is now considered protected. So that's very, very encouraging, and I hope it is to you as you hear this. Renewable energy, yes, we know there's a lot of progress being made. The cost of solar panels has been greatly reduced. Cities and regions everywhere are investing in this. It's definitely a trendy thing. It's such a good thing. We're seeing just the cost go down. It's like when we first got calculators many years ago. They were so expensive. Now they're really inexpensive. And that's starting to happen in some of our renewable energy technologies. So you can cover your house with solar panels much cheaper than you could have 30 years ago. Carbon markets and standards. We now have cap and trade programs. There are actual limits on greenhouse gas emissions that companies must abide by. Some people see this as such a threat to the economy, but long term, it's going to be a good thing for us. Yeah, carbon markets and standards. We're obviously seeing, in some cases, people will choose to not develop a piece of land, and they'll figure out about how much that the tree and the plant life on that land will take up CO2. They'll actually figure out how much, say, 10 acres of forest, how much carbon dioxide 10 acres of forest takes up. And you can actually get paid to keep your land undeveloped, to allow it to simply perform photosynthesis. So we're going to see more and more carbon markets, and we're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing happening. So the government may actually pay you one day just for owning land that you promised to leave more or less natural, so that carbon dioxide levels will be removed or lessened. International cooperations, we're seeing more and more international cooperations, agreements, large conferences where people gather together, like the major summit that happened in Rio back in 1992, where sustainable development was kind of introduced. So there's a lot of progress being made there, more than ever. We are working together. It's no longer just the United States working on becoming more sustainable. In fact, we're behind most countries now. Okay, let's now switch gears. Let's look at the historical perspective. So we've looked at a bunch of trends. We've looked at kind of the state of the world. We've seen some of the good, the bad, the ugly, right? Some things are good, some things aren't so good. Let's now get into some of the historical perspectives on environmental science. So there's a pragmatic resource conservation period, moral and aesthetic nature preservation period. Then we went into more of a environmentalist period of time where we looked a lot at pollution. And then finally we got to global environmental citizenship, which is considered the stage that we're mostly in now. But notice these stages are not mutually exclusive. They do overlap a lot. And there's certainly pieces of all four of these still in existence today. And a lot of our thinking in a lot of our culture today. So we have certainly not done away with any one of these periods. All right, let's go now and look at the first period of time. Pragmatic resource conservation. All right, does anybody know what pragmatic means? Pragmatic is the idea of being practical, useful. This idea was really influenced by Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. We'll get to that in a minute. So George Perkins Marsh wrote a book by the title Man and Nature in 1864. When he wrote that book, he was basing his observations, his thoughts on the degradation of the environment observed in the Mediterranean part of the world. So around Greece, all along the Mediterranean, he saw sheep farms where sheep were just eating up everything on the hillsides. And then when the sheep would graze and the goats would consume this plant life, he saw horrible erosion. And then from the erosion, then he saw soil degradation, then he saw a loss of crop production, and he even saw how that it was affecting the hydrologic cycle. There was less rainfall, more drought. He saw a cascade of results occur, all because of the overgrazing of sheep, in particular, around the Mediterranean part of the world. So he wrote a book about that and talked a lot about how man can greatly impact nature and the health of nature. So that was the first book that came out, and that book was popular enough to where it actually influenced Teddy Roosevelt's thinking, and his conservation advisor, Gifford Pinchot. Pinchot, who was the first American forester, American-born forester. All the foresters before came from Germany and parts of Europe, like France. Gifford Pinchot was the first one born here. And so Roosevelt and Pinchot both had this idea that the natural areas should be for the greatest good, the greatest number, for the longest time. It's all about utilizing natural areas. So we don't preserve nature just for nature's sake. We don't preserve nature for the rights of the animals or plants. No, we preserve nature because it helps human beings. That's the heart of pragmatic utilitarian conservation thinking. How does it help people? And this is still a big part of the United States Forest Service thinking, which y'all should have noticed around here because you are surrounded by a large national forest by the name of Pisgah. Pisgah National Forest covers parts of Burke, McDowell, Caldwell. It's all around this area. Much of western North Carolina is United States Forest Service land. And what can you do with that national forest? Can you cut those trees? You sure can. They log the Forest Service all the time. We're growing trees for people, for lumber. Can you fish in the national forest? Absolutely. Can you hunt in the national forest? Yes. Can you camp there? Yes. Can you burn fires there? You sure can in a campfire, right? So we know the Forest Service and the National Forest System is designed for humans to use, to enjoy. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, it can be abused, but there is so much good in allowing people to enjoy nature. In fact, people who enjoy nature more will take care of nature more. Some of the best environmentalists out there are fisher folks and hunter folks. And I love fishing myself. I hunted a lot when I was younger in Texas. And I tell you what, it gave me a love of nature and protection of nature. So something about being out there. It's not just about the harvesting of these animals. A lot of it is just simply being out, developing a love for the land. So that's the pragmatic utilitarian conservation period of time. We think that was the first period in conservation history. So if you ask Pinchot, why should we protect that forest over there? He'd say, hey, it's for people to enjoy and to use. Stage 2, the next period of time was more of an ethical and aesthetic nature preservation. It was more of a moral thing. And the head of this period, some of the big thinkers here were John Muir and Aldo Leopold. Muir was the president of the Sierra Club. He loved the Sierra Nevadas. He spent tremendous amounts of time in nature in that area. He was an interpreter, he was a guide, and he developed a love for that part of the country and really a love for nature in general. And he basically said, hey, nature deserves to exist simply for its own sake. That the animals, the plants, all have rights, regardless of the degree of usefulness to humans. Whether it's useful to us or not, they still have value. You might call it biocentric preservation. Why ought man to value himself more than anything else? The one great unit of creation. Basically, we are simply members of the community. We should not see land as a commodity. We should see land as a community that we're a part of. So a very, very different view. Muir and Leopold. Leopold was a student of Pinchot. Leopold wrote a wonderful thing called Sand County Almanac. I encourage you to read some of his writings. But in Sand County Almanac, Leopold wrote this in a little shack there on a farm that he bought in Wisconsin. And he just developed such a way of describing environmental concerns, the rights of plants and animals to exist. He wrote beautiful things about how human beings affect nature in both good and bad ways. He planted lots of trees with his children. He was really a pioneering wildlife ecologist. But he started out as a fisher guy. He loved to fish, he loved to hunt, and by spending time in the land, he developed a love for preservation and conservation, simply because it has the right to exist. For its own personal interests, we should protect the land. Here's a picture of some of the folks here. So there's President Teddy Roosevelt. Probably you recognize that guy, pretty famous. And Pinchot, maybe not as recognizable, but you can see these guys would be the pragmatic utilitarian guys. Muir and Leopold would be more on the biocentric preservationist view. So these guys would disagree. So Muir and Leopold would agree on most things, and they would disagree with Pinchot and Roosevelt. And you can see they both have good points, and you can kind of debate that. There's actually a lot of interesting things. I'm saying that one view is better than the other. Then let's now move on to the next stage 3, which is basically what we call environmentalism. Environmentalism, or the environmentalist movement, started from a book called Silent Spring, 1962. Anybody have an idea what that would have been about? Silent Spring. Okay, so when you think of springtime, don't you picture like birds chirping off in the background? Right, yeah. So Silent Spring is about not having any birds around. All the birds are dead. Why? Because of toxins, because of pollutants, things like pesticides. So Rachel Carson wrote about that. She was one of the first people that made people suddenly become aware that, oh my gosh, all these toxins, all these pollutants that we're putting out could actually be killing things, affecting the living world. So that actually began the environmentalist agenda, the stage 3. David Brower came very shortly thereafter, but Brower was the one that really began the use of litigation, intervention, mass media. He's the one that really started the environmentalist activist movement. He's the one that really got us to, Rachel just was more of an author, did a great job, but David's the one that really got the environmentalist movement on the political scene. Lobbyists, he got a lot of people in Washington, used mass media, did a lot of things to help promote environmentalist movement. Like 1970, the Earth Day, Brower had a lot to do with that. Barry Commoner, he was a scientist, and basically he was a biochemist, so he was looking at chemicals and how they influence cells on a very microscopic level. And he knew from his observations underneath the microscope that environmental hazards really can be linked. There can be a link between science, technology, and society. And he knew that certain toxins could cause certain health problems in people. So he was really concerned about human health and how those toxins and pollutants were affecting human health in particular. And even things like cancer. He would really be sensitive to those kinds of things. So being a scientist, working with the activist Brower, with the author Carson, you can see they're all kind of working together. And then we had Wangari Maathai Wangari actually received the Nobel Prize. She was the first to receive the Nobel Prize as an environmental person. So no other person had received the Nobel Prize for environmental action. So in 2004, she received that prize. She started a movement called the Green Belt Movement in 1997, not that long ago, and he organized, basically got poor rural African women to begin to restore the local environment. Basically, she got them to plant trees. She also really strongly encouraged people to become educated, and by being educated about environmental concerns, to promote justice and equality. And this Green Belt movement was such a success. Millions upon millions of trees have been planted. And by those trees being planted, that's allowed African villages to become more sustainable and more independent, and of course more self-sustaining in general. And even long term, they've been able to produce food and shade and just have more water simply because of the planting of trees. So a lot of other things came from that. But she was a huge, what you might call a global environmentalist. So she was more like partly in the environmentalist movement stage 3, but she also was a big part of stage 4, which is the global environmentalist movement, because the Green Belt movement went across the whole world. So there she is. There's Wangari. She represents more stage 4, whereas these 3 were more of the environmentalist movement, stage 3. You can tell by their black and white pictures that they preceded Wangari. But Wangari was working during the middle of the 20th century, but she made huge progress in 1997 with the Green Belt movement. Again, a worldwide movement to promote the better stewardship of the land, particularly the planting of trees. So we get to stage 4, again, in global environmentalism. Wangari is one of those leaders. You can see here in stage 4, with modern information technology, with transportation, the world is a little smaller now. You can catch a flight out of Charlotte. You can be in Africa in 10 hours or less. So we can get around the world pretty fast now. And we obviously have technologies that can affect the whole world. For example, sometimes 75% of the pollutants along the West Coast, 75% of the air pollutants along the West Coast can be traced to Asia. So we're starting to think more globally, because if Asians are affecting our air quality, we're affecting the air quality of other nations across the world. The world's a little smaller now thanks to our international communications, our technologies, our ability to fly, and information technology, and technology as well. So local and regional environmental leaders increasingly have a worldwide impact. So some of the leaders are Wangari, of course. We mentioned her, out of Kenya with the Green Belt movement, planting lots of trees. Zaigang out of China talked about a lot about the removal of dams in China, establishing natural hydrologic flows in China, those kinds of things. Just the impact of putting a dam and what that might do in places like China. That was a big thing that you promoted here. Yunus in India, Muhammad Yunus, Brundtland in Norway, all of these people around the world, and quite a few out of China now, are really helping us to think more globally and think about global impacts. Okay, so now, last little topic, guys. We'll wrap this thing up. A divided world. So you've probably known this your whole life, but you've probably heard when you're a child, you need to eat all that on your plate. Why? Why should you eat all the food off your plate? What would your mom say? Because there are starving people in China. There are starving people in Africa, wherever, right? Well, there's a lot of truth to that. We do live in a very divided world. The rich are getting richer. The poor are actually getting richer too. But the gap between rich and poor is widening. So all of us, generally speaking, are getting richer. Yes, even the poor are getting wealthier through the years, but much slower. The rich are gaining riches and at a faster rate. So the World Bank estimates that about 1.4 billion people live in extreme poverty, earning less than $1.25 per day. Shocking. So it's about a billion, a little over a billion here, really poor, and then we have a billion that are very wealthy. Now, when I tell you what wealthy means, you're going to probably laugh to yourself. Over $30,000 a year is the richest billion of the world. Isn't that amazing? So you may think you're kind of poor, but compared to the world, you are rich. Very few people listening to this online lecture would fall into global poverty standards. Even the poorest in the United States are richer than most of the poorest countries. So the poor are often both victims and agents of environmental degradation. So here's the thing. It's like that opening story about the slums of Nairobi. The thing about being poor, you do whatever you can to survive. So you're going to manipulate your environment. You're going to dig, or you're going to cut a tree down. You're going to do whatever you can to provide, say, fuel wood to keep your family warm. And so you're a victim of environmental degradation, but you're also an agent of it because you have immediate needs. Present survival needs are so great that you can't even afford to plan ahead. And this really hurts, of course, long-term sustainability. So the cycle of poverty then continues as they are the agents of environmental degradation, then they're the victims of it. And the cycle goes on and on and on. It's so hard to pull out of it over many generations. And then they become malnourished because of the poor environment. They become sick, then they can't work, and then they can't raise healthy children. Again, this cycle continues. So sustainable development, we're going to talk about what that is, but that is an effort to try to make our energy more sustainable while at the same time accommodating for a growing world population. So we're going to try to have more and more resources available and keep the environmental conditions cleaner or better at the same time we see the global populations increase. So while the human population is taking off very rapidly, 80 million a year we're growing by, keeping those the conditions of the environment and the conditions of the poor in the world as best we can while trying to accommodate for this growing population. It's a very tricky thing. So meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's one of the greatest challenges we have. About a fifth of the world population lives in countries where the income is greater than 35,000. So only about a fifth. Again, a little bit more than the richest billion. It's actually a little bit more than that now because the human population has grown. But it's about 35,000. You're considered very wealthy. The other 4/5, or 80%, live in middle or low income countries. So again, just by making 35,000 a year or more, you're in that top fifth. The gap between rich and poor continues to increase. However, both the rich are getting richer and the poor are actually getting wealthier. But the richer are getting richer faster. So the gap continues to increase. It's really hard. You know, when you come from a wealthy background, you've got a parent or grandparent that invested in stocks or different kinds of monies, and then that money is then used to help you get an education. You're supported through the years. They may even sprinkle some money on you from time to time. And then you begin to invest, and you begin to get prepared for your future, and then you grow up, and then you accumulate wealth, and you pass it along. That cycle just continues, and so the rich can get richer over time, but the poor, it's a lot harder for them. But they really are. The GDP, the gross domestic product of all of our countries, even the poorest, generally increases. So we are seeing more wealth than ever. The gap between rich and poor affects many quality of life indicators. So what do you think happens as gross domestic product increases? So as a country becomes richer, what do you think happens? Like to literacy rates, what do you think? Literacy rates go up when GDP goes up. How about infectious diseases? Yeah, infectious disease rates go down when GDP goes up. How about the number of children born per woman? As GDP goes up, the number of children born per woman generally goes down. So how about clean water, sanitation? As GDP goes up, clean water and sanitation, it goes up too, right? You're going to have more clean water, better sanitation. Think about those relationships. It's amazing how powerful the wealth and what that does for your environment. It's amazing what money, finances can do to an environment. Generally, it's a good thing. There is a point where increased wealth can hurt you, because increased wealth causes you to consume many more goods and resources, like we see in the United States. And as we consume more goods and resources, we burn more fossil fuels. We create dirtier air, water that's less clean. So there is a little bit of a drop when GDP goes up. Sometimes you'll see some of these air quality, water quality indicators go down. But generally speaking, though, as it continues to rise, you'll find ways to clean that water, and then it goes back up again. So generally speaking, as GDP goes up, environmental conditions also improve. Not always. So here's a graph showing some of that. So here on this scale, we have increasing wealth on the x-axis. We have the severity of water contamination, urban air pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. Let's see how that changes. So in a really poor country, you could see that water contamination is really bad. Urban air pollution is increasingly bad. And greenhouse gas emissions starts to rise a little bit. The really poor countries have really bad water contamination, but they don't have very bad air pollution or greenhouse gas emissions. They're just so poor. Contrast in the middle, when you get to middle wealth countries, countries like Mexico, you'll see water contamination is much lower. The water is a lot cleaner now. Urban air pollution, though, goes way up. I experienced this when I was in Guatemala. I was in Guatemala City, and oh my gosh, the air pollution was horrible there. The water was clean, generally speaking, was good. It was safe to drink. And then greenhouse gas emissions, of course, that was going up. But I just remember incredible traffic there. Of course, that's almost more of a even poorer country, but they had so much, and they had a lot of automobiles, a lot of traffic. They weren't using bicycles to get around. Most people were using cars. So kind of a middle GDP. And then you get to really wealthy countries. And when you get to really wealthy countries, of course, water is really clean. Typically, urban air pollution actually starts to drop. They have so much money they can actually invest in things like renewable technologies. However, your greenhouse gas emissions can sometimes increase because people are so wealthy they can travel, they can do extra things that require more energy, eat more, higher quality food, have higher calorie diets. Just traveling on vacation, that really increases greenhouse gas emissions. So interesting trends as you go across your gross domestic product, you're increasing wealth. So is there enough for everybody? Well, we can never say there's always enough for everybody in every situation. Wealthy nations consume an inordinate share of the world's resources and produce an unsustainable amount of pollution. Think about this, guys. U.S., we're only about just under 5% of the world's population, but we consume 20% of all the oil production, and this is embarrassing. We generate half of the toxic waste in the world. Exclamation. Should be an explanation there, point there. We're only 5%, guys, yet we produce 50% of toxic waste in the world. We need to be much, much more responsible. And we keep getting away with it. Why? Because we're the United States. We can get away with things because the rest of the world is very dependent on our economy. And we've kind of been a leader for many, many years now. And our military force has also caused us to have a lot of power. So we can get away with a lot of this. If all the residents in China, which is, that China's population is well over 1 billion. If they decided, I'm going to live at American standards, it would take 4 planet Earths to support the world using their current technology. So the Chinese currently consume much fewer resources. In fact, their average annual salary in US dollars is still only like $20,000, $25,000 a year. And the Chinese have a very good economy. Everything's made in China, right? At least seems like that. So yeah, they're really hard workers. They're producing a lot. Their economy is generally good, but they still only make $20,000, $25,000. If they get a car, that's a big deal. Most Chinese still ride to work in a bicycle. So if they were to match our consumption, they started driving cars like us, oh my gosh, the global impact would be tremendous. So you'll see big differences among developed nations. Germany, for example, is much, much more sustainably minded than the United States. We'll talk more about that. Economic progress, again, since the Second World War, the average real income in developing countries has actually doubled. Life expectancy has increased by 30%. So we're saying after World War II, so after 1945, 1946 and beyond, even people in developing countries, the poorer countries, their income has doubled. Remember I said before, the poor have actually gotten richer, but it's been very slow. And life expectancy has increased that much. But keep in mind, the gap is still there and it's actually widening. So the poor are getting richer, the rich are getting richer, but the rich are getting richer even faster. So that's where we stand on economic progress. But at least it's encouraging to know that even people in Africa are now able to buy things like bicycles, and they're even starting to be able to buy motorized scooters. It won't be long before they can buy cars if this continues. And of course, that could have a big global impact. So developing countries, guys, that's where most of the world's population is right now. Okay, most people live in a developing country. That's where most of the children of the world are too. And they are going to grow up, and as their GDP increases, you're going to see them begin to use more fossil fuels. So it's very important that we try to develop clean technologies before they begin to grow up and start making a livelihood themselves. All right, so let's go now to this. Okay, that's where we'll actually end. The only thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up is your ecological footprint. You're going to be doing a lab on calculating your ecological footprint, Lab 1. Just a couple tips. When you go in to the ecological footprint lab there in Moodle, in the Chapter 1 folder, you'll click on the link and that will take you to a survey. The survey is going to ask all kinds of personal questions about your what kind of foods you eat and how you get to work and how far you travel and what kinds of foods you eat, all kinds of things like how far you travel to work, those types of things. Do you travel? Do you go on vacation? A bunch of questions like that. And we're going to come up eventually with an actual number. It's your ecological footprint, which is a measure used to quantify the demands you place on nature by yourself. You could also apply an ecological footprint to a whole nation. So you could say like the United States ecological footprint, but you can also say the ecological footprint of Jim or Sally or whatever. When you do this, your results will either be in Earths or global hectares. So based on your lifestyle, let's say your number when you got done was 4 Earths. That means that if everyone adopted your lifestyle, it would take 4 Earths to sustain the humanity. Isn't that crazy? If your ecological footprint is 2, it means it's going to take 2 Earths to sustain your lifestyle, if everyone adopted your lifestyle. Don't be surprised if it's high. You are an American. You probably have a high ecological footprint number. Or your ecological footprint number might be in hectares, global hectares. What's a hectare? It's about 100 meters by 100 meters. It's roughly 2.5 acres. So that's how much land it would take to support you over a given year. The average world citizen has a global footprint of 2.7 global hectares. 2.7, so just under 3 global hectares is what the average world citizen consumes. That's how much land it takes to support those world citizens. And again, that's the average. But the biologically productive land is only 1.8 global hectares. So in other words, everyone needs to have an ecological footprint number of 1.8 global hectares to have the same thing as 1 Earth. So 1 Earth is the same thing as 1.8 global hectares. That's where we need to be sustainable. But what I just say, the average world citizen is 2.7. So across the world, we are consuming much more than the Earth can keep up with. Listen to this. The average resident of the U.S., 7.2 global hectares. Remember these numbers, guys. You're going to need all these numbers on the lab. So it's 7.2 global hectares. It's like a little over 4 Earths if you convert it to Earth, somewhere around there. That's the average for an American citizen. 2.7 is the global average, and 1.8 is where we need to be. Now, the global hectares measurement and the Earth measurement is not perfect. There are assumptions about the ecological footprint. You can see that on page 15. And you'll see that the ecological footprint varies greatly among developed countries. So you think all the developed countries would be about the same? Like, European countries, America, Australia, we'd all basically be the same. Actually, there's tremendous variation. So keep that in mind. Remember that, guys. I think that may be one of those quiz things you need to know. Remember that countries like Germany, they actually only have a average ecological footprint number of 4.6 global hectares. So Germany is much, much less than the United States, which is 7.2. That's pretty impressive. Germany is a developed country, yet it's only 4.6. 2.7 is the, again, global average, so they're still above that. But Germany has heavily invested in wind, solar, all kinds of different types of powers, hydropower. Costa Rica has invested in geothermal, so their ecological footprint number is quite low, despite the fact that Costa Rica is much more developed than a lot of the other Central American countries. So ecological footprint, guys, and I'm sure you'll be curious to see what yours is. I'd love to know. You're not going to be judged on your ecological footprint number. Mine is not wonderful either. I'm an American as well, and we try our best. My poor wife, she divvies out all of our trash. We try to recycle. We do a lot of what we can, but my commute to work is 70 miles a day, 35 miles one way, 35 miles another way. That just kills my ecological footprint number. So don't feel like you'll be judged. The idea is to try to get better. So just give me your honest number when you do the footprint number. And when you finish the quiz and it gives you your ecological footprint number, it breaks down the areas so that you can see what parts of your lifestyle contribute to the higher number. Like for me, transportation, the use of fossil fuels is very high because of my long commute. You might find it's your food consumption, services is a big one, especially if you use a lot of electronic technologies like smartphones and things. You might have a little bit of a higher number there. So anyway, it'll be, I think, enlightening, and I hope you do take that number seriously and try to find ways to reduce that. All right. Well, guys, look, I know you may have questions. Feel free to email me at mspath@wpcc.edu. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. I do check my emails very regularly, 7 days a week. I always check my emails, even on weekends. So if there's anything you have a question about, I'd be happy to help you. And we did cover, well, just a little over half the review sheet. And we'll finish the second half of Chapter 1 in the next online lecture. Well, I hope you all have enjoyed this. I hope it's been enlightening. And there's a lot more to learn. This is just the beginning. So looking forward to a semester of environmental biology with all of you.